Welcome to the podcast where together, every Monday, we explore hospitality in its very broadest sense. From culture and cooking, cocktails and coffee, nutrition and farming, politics and animal welfare, organic and sustainability, family and business, entrepreneurship, and much, much more. Come and learn with me, Mark Cribb, about where our food and our drink comes from, and the businesses and, more importantly, the human beings that thrive on where we decide to spend our time and our money. Sign up to our weekly newsletter at humansofhospitality.co.uk and hit subscribe on your podcast player of choice. Welcome to the podcast, and just a little intro this week because this episode is long enough on its own and it's the school holidays, so I am off to St Ives in Cornwall for a few days with the family and the dog, so I will get a move on for all of our sakes. This week's guest is Nicholas Dickinson, and if you don't know his name, you will certainly know some of the places that Nicholas has worked and some of the businesses that he has developed. Nicholas, without a doubt, is a bona fide human of hospitality. It has been his life's work. From cutting his teeth at the Chewton Glen, working for the likes of Robin Hutson, to becoming the MD at Manoir and being Raymond Blanc's right-hand man, whilst working in partnership with Richard Branson and the Virgin Group. And having learned from some of the most inspirational leaders in our sector, it was time to go it alone when Nicholas co-founded a luxury family hotels. Along with a few others at the time, they created a new genre of hotels that many have replicated since. I'll let Nicholas tell the story of how the purchase of a hotel in Liverpool led to the need to start considering a sale, and how Von Essen's offer was just too good to turn down. Now Nicholas has found his happy place once again on the coalface of hospitality with just one beautiful country house, Congham Hall. Nicholas has some strong views around the challenges of the government's approach to COVID in the rural hotel space and how ridiculous the implementation of some of these rules are. But overall, he's busy, still in love with hospitality, tells the story of his adventures very well, and still has ambitions to continue to develop and add rooms to what will be his last hotel. Nicholas was warm and generous with his time and has been good enough to introduce me to some great future guests too. I hope you all enjoy learning and hearing firsthand about his interesting career that once again demonstrates just how much fun and how much can be achieved in a life of hospitality. Remember, if you enjoy the chat, please take the time to head over to your podcast player of choice and hit 5 stars and subscribe. It really helps me attract the very best guests if I can show them that other people are enjoying the conversations and plenty of people are listening. Okay, thank you so much and enjoy this week's show. Nicholas Dickinson from Congham Hall, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. Unfortunately, we're not face-to-face, Nicholas, but for people listening, can you just explain where in the world are you, please?
Oh, thank you very much, Mark. Yes, I'm actually sitting at home with the rain pouring outside my office window in just outside Cambridge.
Ah, so how far are you from the hotel then?
About just over an hour.
Okay.
I wanted to move up to Norfolk, but my wife forbid me from doing that because she said if I did, I'd never get home.
Fair enough. Okay. And in Bournemouth, where I am on the south coast, it's also a very dark and damp winter's day. So, yeah, shocking. Right, you have had quite the incredible hospitality adventure over the last 30 or so years. So I'm really excited to chat to you. You've been at the iconic kind of places like Chewton Glen and Le Manoir. You've set up your own hotel groups and you've even been in Portugal for a while. So it's going to be quite a diverse conversation, and it's tricky to know where to start. But I think having had Robin and Ollie from the Pig on recently, I'm going to start there if that's okay. So your sort of first role, I think it was 1992, trainee manager. You ended up at the Chewton Glen, a few years with David Brockett and then a few years with Robin Hutson. Clearly something happened in that time period that set you on this sort of destination for a career in hospitality. Can you just talk a little bit about what it was at the Chewton Glen that sort of got you hooked on the sector and maybe the differences between Robin and David from a management style perspective?
You flatter me, Mark, by saying 1992. It's actually 10 years earlier. It was 1982. I wish it was 1992. Yeah, it actually goes back to I was just left school in 1981. I had not done very well at my A levels, and careers people had said to me during the A level time that I'd always wanted to have my own hotel, and sort of silly sort of way, and they'd said that hospitality and hotel keeping was what people did what they failed when they failed at what they really wanted to do. So because I didn't do very well in my A levels and didn't get to the university to read civil engineering, which is what I was planning to do, I decided, okay, I failed at what I really want to do, I'm going to work in a hotel. And at that point, I had to try and work out, well, what was this sort of hotel experience that I wanted to offer when I was doing it for myself. And I didn't know Chewton Glen, but I flicked through all the hotel guides, and Chewton Glen stuck out as being one of the preeminent privately owned country house hotels of its day. And I rang up Martin Scan and said, hello, Martin, I've just left rugby school and I'd like to have my own hotel one day. And he said, oh, really? I went to Haileybury. Would you like to come and have lunch? And that's the one and only time I've waved my old school tie. But I went and had lunch with Martin. My dad came with me, and at the end of that lunch, I was offered the position of trainee manager. Chewton Glen hadn't had a trainee manager before. I was its first trainee manager, and I started in 1982 as a hall porter, and did 3 months as a hall porter. Then I did 18 months in the kitchen. I worked in all the sections in the kitchen, and basically went through the hotel departments. And as you say, that was under the watch of David Brockett, who was your classic old school general manager. I always remember David used to keep a fountain pen in his pocket and sign all his letters beautifully in his fountain pen. And I was given the perfect grounding of everything that one could expect and ask for in a country house hotel setting under the sort of traditional hotel keeping. I left Chewton Glen to go to what was then Oxford Poly to complete my HCIMA Part B qualification. I suddenly realised that I did have a bit of a brain and I should better get a few qualifications under my belt. And during that time, Robin arrived at Chewton Glen whilst I was away. And Martin rang me up after I'd finished my year at Oxford and said, we'd like you to come back. And I said, no, I've done my stint. Thank you very much, Martin. I'm going to climb the ladder. But he said, no, things are going to be different. Come back. And I'm so glad I did, because I went back and worked for Robin for 3 years as I had 3 management positions: assistant manager, reception manager, sales manager. Robin sort of fast tracked me up the ladder. And of course, that was first-hand experience of how to turn a traditional country house hotel on its head and do it completely differently, which is what Robin is still doing to this day with, well, formerly Hotel de Van and then the Pig. So I got this same beautiful hotel with 2 completely different spins on it, which was mind-blowing and a complete eye-opener for me as to how you could deliver an experience in the same experience, basically, in 2 fundamentally different ways.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? Like you say, to see exactly the same building, exactly the same location, but with such a different approach. What was it? I suppose why, in the first instance, why was there a change? Was that sort of consumer driven? Did it need to change? And then what exactly was so different?
That's a really interesting question, and you have to sort of try and get into the head of Martin Scan, really, to answer that question. Martin was a far-sighted chap when he started Chewton Glen in 1966, 65. But I think he had come to realise that it had gone a long way down a road and it needed to slightly reinvent itself in terms of how it put its proposition to the marketplace without revolutionising itself. It was sort of had been doing the same thing, the very, very traditional ways of delivering service for 20 plus years. And I think he probably thought that just needs to evolve. And then he was lucky enough to find Robin as someone who could help him evolve it.
So what sort of changes were made there? What was different?
It's just subtle. It less reliance on the formality, bowing and scraping, more on the the true the true essence of what giving people a good time is all about, but without losing the 5-star service. And also, I think recognizing even back then in the 80s that you needed to look after staff more than expect them to work, endless shifts, that you had to sort of understand what they were, what was in it for them as much as what they were giving for you.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's quite a long time. It feels like that's been quite a long journey, because still probably we have a reputation for excessive hours, but I think there's probably been more change in the last 4 or 5 years than maybe the 10 or 15 before that, certainly in the kitchens. Would that be fair, or would you say actually it's a bit of a myth and it's been changing for a long time?
I think I think it has been changing for a long time. I think it's like anything, really. It's just continually needs to evolve. Don't get me wrong. There are a lot of people in hospitality who shouldn't be in hospitality, because by its nature, it is a lifestyle. It doesn't make sense purely as a day job. It's a 24/7 game. If you don't like working on a Saturday night because all your mates are out partying, then don't come into hospitality. Go and get a job in a shop. So there is an inherent need for people working in hospitality to actually enjoy that, and for it to be an important part of their life rather than just a job. If it's not your vocation, don't do it. And there's a lot of people for whom that's the case. And those that do love it, do still need to have that often totted out phrase, work-life balance. I feel very lucky myself. I've said to lots of people, I've never done a hard day's work in my life. I work very hard at easy work. Which makes it quite hard for me to have a work-life balance, because the lines blur between when I'm at work and when I'm not, because work is just fun, and therefore you're addicted to it and you do it probably too much. And that's, I think that you need a bit of that if you're going to succeed in this game, and therefore you don't get too fussed about the long hours, because it's long hours of something that's just great fun.
Yeah, and every time you go out for dinner or have any piece of food delivered to your house or whatever, I suppose it's all research. You're constantly absorbing, aren't you? So you can never quite switch off the same way as other people do.
100%.
Yeah. So I read that you said you knew you wanted to be a hotelier from the age of 4. That feels impossible. Is that true?
It might not be 4. So yeah, the careers teacher thing is true, that I said back at school to careers people I wanted to have my own hotel. That's what I wanted to do. It started because we went as a family to the Malta Hilton in Valletta 3 years in a row, when I think I was either 4, 5 and 6, or might be 5, 6 and 7, something like that. And that was my first experience of going on a plane, first experience going to a country outside England. And to do it 3 years in a row, me and my 2 sisters were very close in age. We were sort of cosseted by this hotel and all the staff, and we were treated, by the time we got there for the 3rd time, as almost like long lost relatives who'd come back to visit. And I do remember, and it probably was on the last visit, sort of going around and asking the restaurant manager, can I see your wine cellar, and can someone show me around the kitchen? And I was just fascinated by the community that made up the staff at the Malta Hilton, and that stuck with me. And I never wanted to do anything else. I never had aspirations as a young lad to be an engine driver or a train driver or a pilot or anything, fireman, or what young boys tend to want to be. I just wanted to have my own hotel, and that was all because I liked what I'd experienced at the Malta Hilton. Never went away.
Wow, amazing. Okay. And you were very honest with that in your job application, to say, I want to come and work at the Chewton Glen because I want my own hotel. Was that the same when you went to Le Manoir? Did you let Raymond know that fundamentally you wanted to set your own up, or how did that come about?
So, okay, by that stage, I made a bit of my name for myself at Chewton Glen. They sort of liked what I done for them. I'd been there for 8 years on 2 stints, and it was actually Robin that got me the job at the Manoir. But again, timing was perfect. Raymond had moved what was then Les Quatre Saisons from his little shop front in Summertown in Oxford out to Great Milton Manor 5 years previously, which he'd run with his then wife Jenny, and for the first 5 years. And then he and Jenny split up. And they'd run that business with Raymond sort of running the kitchen and Jenny running everything else. And Raymond suddenly thought, oh my God, I need someone to do what Jenny did. And I was lucky enough.
Not be his wife, luckily.
Well, sometimes I felt like I wasn't my wife, but we better not go there. But I was lucky enough to sort of step into the shoes that Jenny vacated at the age of 26. I joined the Manoir as hotel manager and spent 5 amazing and roller coaster years trying to help Raymond deliver his breed of hospitality and to make the most of what this creative genius, because that's what he is, make commercial sense. You had this endless fount of bonkers ideas, some of which were useless, some of which were pure genius, all of which he was adamant needed to be enacted, and try and sort of carve a way forward for that business to deliver this man's vision. It was an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah, I bet. I reckon I could probably spend an hour just quizzing you on that, but we will run out of time. But just in essence, what is it about Raymond? Because he's clearly known for his sort of his palate, I suppose, and he's amazing with food. But I was at Le Manoir a few weeks ago, and what he's created there, particularly with the grounds and the gardens, and it is absolutely stunning. It sets the bar so high, I think, from that sort of seed to plate thing. So what was his drive and his obsession? What did you learn about Raymond during that time with him that sort of demonstrates, I suppose, why he's created what he has created?
Raymond developed my palate. He has the most amazing ability to detect and work with flavor and simple flavors. So he would just take something really, really simple and a bowl of water, and he'd just add a touch of, I don't know, carrot to that water. And then he'd say, sip this. And you just got this a massive flavour of carrot, let's say. I can't particularly whether I remember did it with carrot and water, but I remember lots of things where I just go, wow. And then he'd explain to you which bit of your tongue was tasting that. And then he'd do something else and he'd put some pepper in it or something and it would taste horrible. And then he'd explain why that bit was reacting with that bit. So that you could... And I can't, this is the trouble, if I put something in my mouth, I know whether it tastes good or bad. I know whether it's right. And I also know what perhaps you need to add to it or what it's missing to make it right. But I know that because Raymond's taught me and he's educated my palate. He knew that instinctively. He just put something in his mouth. He just instinctively know why it wasn't right. That's the creative genius that he is. And then he used that ability, that talent that he's got to come up with just, weird and wonderful inventions. I genuinely saw him. It's very difficult with food, and particularly with the fact that, we've only got a limited range of basic ingredients to be original. And if we go back to the 80s, just treading background, everyone tried to be original by doing stupid things with nouvelle cuisine and putting kiwi fruit with turbot or something, and it tastes revolting. But everyone said no one's done that before. That's because it tastes revolting. But Raymond, if you're taking the basic ingredients of fish and meat and stuff, and he would just do amazing things with them that were original. They were just, and they worked, and it was just genius. And that was always what we had to try and keep as the heart of what the Manoir was all about. It was this very special place that increasingly has become ever more grand and ever more luxurious and got lots more bells and whistles on it. But at its heart is this little Frenchman's genius. that just is able to do amazing things in a simple way with simple ingredients.
Yeah, amazing. And did you have reasonable sort of free rein? Because you worked up from GM to MD, I guess. So presumably that was really good for your sort of career trajectory. Were you getting the opportunity there to sort of, I don't know, to put your own sort of style and your own sort of spin on things, working in partnership with Raymond?
I was very clear that it was not my business. It was his. In fact, it wasn't his business. But anyone who thinks that it's not all about him makes a fundamental mistake. Funnily enough, it was his business when I first started there, but then he got into partnership with Virgin, and so Virgin obviously then subsequently sold out to Orient Express, that then became Belmond. I saw my job exclusively as protecting what Raymond wanted to deliver, understanding from Raymond what it was that he wanted to deliver, trying to make commercial sense of that, and then delivering it. Once I became a board member, making sure his partner, Richard Branson, effectively, remained on board with that as a principle and didn't take it down a route that was maybe appropriate for Virgin but not appropriate for Raymond Blanc.
And is that's quite an interesting statement. Is that route, the commercial aspect? Because I would imagine if you're Raymond, then that obsession with food and quality and the number of chefs that you need in the kitchen to create that sort of thing could be quite sort of not necessarily conflicting, but clearly the reality is in the commercial world that it also needs to be profitable. Was that the line you were walking between sort of perfection in Raymond's eyes and needing to generate cash in Richard's eyes? Or
I don't think Richard was pushing so much for sort of needing to generate cash, but that there was an ulterior motive to the Virgin involvement, which was being able to make use of Raymond on Raymond's abilities, particularly in the airline and developing the cuisine in the airline, and that was fine as long as the Virgin didn't think that they could have great ideas as to how the Manoir might like to be pushed. They never did. I mean, I was lucky enough that they trusted that I would take responsibility for ensuring the Manoir was commercially successful in the way that was right for Raymond. I mean, an example of making it commercially successful, you've just taken me back, is the cookery school. That actually started as an idea that I had to fill the bedrooms in the winter. So the cookery school started out with, we had 10 bedrooms, we had 20 bedrooms at the Manoir at that stage, and we knew we could fill about 10 of them regularly during the winter, but we struggled to fill 20 of them. And I got fed up of sort of trying to persuade, little meetings coming and visiting the Manoir. It wasn't really what the Manoir was all about. Manoir was all about food, not just hosting a business meeting because some company was prepared to pay you a load of money and sit in a meeting room that wasn't really equipped for the purpose because it was more of a private dining room. So I thought, well, hang on a second, let's focus on the food bit and invite I think we started with 5 people to come and stay at the Manoir Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and do some cookery lessons in the kitchen. They're paying for the bedrooms that would otherwise sit empty, and we're focusing on what's true to Raymond, which was the food, and that little idea succeeded in filling the bedrooms. I think we ran it for 2 or 3 years like that before the whole idea got taken to a whole another level, and the cookery school that's now at the Manoir was created as a sort of almost separate business doing its own thing in its own different right. But I think that's what I'm trying to say in terms of focusing on what was right for Raymond. It wouldn't have been right for me to push to say, we need to be taking more business meetings in the winter to fill these rooms. But it was totally right to say, why don't we get people come and stay in these rooms and learn how to cook at the same time?
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so it looks like the sort of place that would be quite easy to get stuck for quite a long time because it's just, I suppose, very beautiful. Chatting to Gary Jones a few weeks ago, he's been there a long time and actually been back for a second stint. What was the trigger that made you decide to hand in your notice? Because I don't think you had something else that you were going to go straight into. It was a 6-month notice period. What made you do that?
Well, I had tried to leave twice. I originally said to Raymond I'd do 3 years. And after 3 years, I said it was time for me to go, and he persuaded me to stay on and do another 2. To be honest, after 5 years, I think I definitely needed to go. I've argued, if you look back, no one has done, with one exception, more than 5 years as GM or whatever of the Manoir since I did the first stint. And most people have managed to do 5 years. A few didn't get off first base, with the exception of Philip Newman Hall. Philip managed to do 2 stints, but of course he had to have a big gap in between those 2 stints, and his last stint was 6 years. I always take my hat off to Philip. He's the only person who managed more than 5, because Raymond, he rings you out, and 5 years really is, in terms of being his right hand man, and from a business perspective, I would argue you've got to be superhuman to do more than that. So I needed to go, and he eventually accepted that he was going to let me go. As you say, I gave him 6 months' notice, and I was again in the right place at the right time. I had met Nigel Chapman many years earlier when he had just started Woolly Grange, and we'd kept in touch. And I had decided now was the time for me to have my own business, and I was looking at little hotels dotted around the country with what I could afford by shaking piggy and getting all the monies together. And one of the hotels I looked at was a little hotel outside Cheltenham. And unbeknown to me, the people who were selling that hotel knew Nigel very well, and happened to mention to him that this chap from the Manoir had been around to have a look around, and they were quite optimistic that he might buy it. So that prompted Nigel, unbeknown to me, to get in touch with me and say, come on, we need to have a chat. Nigel's a very, very unusual character. I'm probably unusual, but Nigel is very unusual. And Nigel and I, to cut a long story short, formed a business relationship that we were like chalk and cheese, but worked brilliantly. He's an accountant by background. He had, having done Woolly Grange as retired, it intended to be a retirement project for himself, with his brother running it, had, through the first recession and Gulf War in the early 90s, had to incorporate that business and get some outside money in, which he did through the business expansion scheme. And that business expansion scheme, as was coming to an end. It was going to be finished in December 1993. And he said to me, we can raise a bit of money under the business expansion scheme, and with that, we can develop a group of family hotels like in the mold of Woolly Grange. And my son had been born in July 1993, so this resonated with me perfectly, coming back to having something that is it's got a USP. Wanted to stay in the sort of country house hotel sort of sector, but here Nigel had tested the market with a country house hotel that not only welcomed children, but basically had oodles of facilities for children, creches, and all of this sort of stuff. And here was my opportunity to develop, turn that single hotel into a business. Anyway, we came out with a grand prospectus to raise, I think it was £4.5 million, which we launched in October 1993. Bearing in mind, we had until the 31st of December to get this money in. And I spent 2.5 months ringing anyone and everyone I knew, including obviously a few former Manoir guests, including the odd celebrity a few of whom actually had been cookery school attendees at the Manoir, and anyone I thought had a bit of money, I sort of tapped them up. And I sat in an office on Christmas Day taking telephone calls for anyone who wanted to send us money. And on the 31st of December 1993, we'd raised the grand total of, I think, about £230,000. And we had a chap called David Newling Ward as our brought on board as our non-executive chairman. He got quite a good pedigree going back, and he'd obviously brought in quite a few of his contacts, so they put a bit of money in. I think, you're talking about people putting between £1,000 and £5,000 in each. I think we had a couple of investments of about 40,000, but it was really loose change for these people. And David said to us, "Oh, that's been a bit of a waste of time. Let's give it all back." And I went, "You've got to be joking. I'm out of a job next week. I'm going to spend it. We're going to buy a hotel." So I spent 6 months I left the Manoir in early January 1994, and I spent 6 months trawling around the country trying to find a suitable hotel that we could turn into a sort of a replica of Woolly Grange. and there was nothing. There was nothing. Everything was either too much or not appropriate or not suitable. And eventually we stumbled across the Old Bell in Malmesbury, which was being sold by Clipper, a chap called Robert Breer. Some people will remember Robert Breer. He was a really larger-than-life, avuncular character. And we had this meeting with Robert Breer, which I'll remember to my dying day. It was in Claridge's. Nigel, David and I sat down opposite Robert, and Robert said, "So are you going to buy this hotel off us?" And we said, "Well, we'd like to." And he said, "Right, I'm going to order a couple of bottles of Krug." He said, "If we do the deal, I'll pay for the Krug. If not, you have to pay for the Krug." So we cracked open this Krug champagne in Claridge's, and we chatted, and we cracked a deal. And then we said to Robert, "Really sorry, but that's fine. We'll do this deal, but we can't afford it. So you're going to have to lend us 150,000 of the purchase price." And he went, "Oh God, go on then." So that was how we started. We bought the Old Bell with the vendor putting in a vendor loan of £150,000, and that became the sort of what we called then the town mouse to Woolly Grange's country mouse. We did turn it into a luxury family hotel, even though it didn't really work as such. We put a creche in there, but it worked quite well for a while in partnership with Woolly, because the Old Bell was really a corporate hotel. And so we were able to help Woolly by dropping overspill corporate business into Woolly during the week, whilst Woolly, that was full at weekends for sort of months and months, out for people, spaced out families who wanted to come away from London to have a bit of time and stick their children in the den. And they just sent their overspill family business to the Old Bell. And that's kind of how luxury family hotels sort of started. And then we obviously developed that business by doing more hotels in time. We adopted having sort of realized quite how hard it was to raise small amounts of money. Once you've got a little bit of money, you've got a little bit of headway, it then becomes increasingly easier, of course. So we adopted what I call the Victor Cayenne principle. We put cards in the guest bedrooms and said, if you've enjoyed your stay, you might like to become an investor. And I built up a database of about 1,000 people who ticked the box on that card and gave me their details. You probably wouldn't be allowed to do it today, GDPR and all that.
Yeah,
so
that's a great way of raising cash, isn't it? I've got to ask, before you carry on, who paid for the champagne? I'm thinking, if you managed to negotiate a deal where he had to lend you 150 grand, did you have to pay for the drinks, or did he still pay for those?
No, he still paid for the drinks. We paid him a good return on his 150 grand.
You're
he
quite
paid for
the negotiator. and in those early days, when you were first raising the sort of the grand here, the 5 grand there, the sort of, like you said, the loose changes you put it, what were you offering them in return? Were they just doing this as a bit of a favour because you had the gift of the gab, or were you offering them sort of equity or shareholder, or what was their motivation?
So they had a shares. Sorry, I should explain. The business expansion scheme was basically they got tax relief on their investment. So I think the business expansion scheme gave them it was certainly 40% tax relief. I think
similar to the EIS kind of scheme now, I guess.
EIS came in subsequently, and in fact, our next 2 hotels we did as EIS. So Moonfleet Manor and Foy Hall, those were both EIS issues. And then Gordon Brown, in his infinite wisdom in 1997, when Labour came to their landslide victory, he paid to hotels being able to be done as EIS. You can still do it for restaurants, of course, but hotels no longer qualify. So we did BES for the Old Bell, and then EIS for Moonfleet and Foy, and then subsequently had to come up with ever more creative schemes that didn't rely on tax relief. But there's no doubt about it, the tax relief was a big incentive for people to come in, and is still there today. For lots of restaurants do EIS. That's how they fund themselves.
I was chatting to Chris Gumbel from Brewhouse and Kitchen actually a little while ago, and the EIS was how they've built their sort of group. I don't know what he's got now, 20-ish maybe, Brewhouse and Kitchens, and done in a similar way. So you then start this trajectory, and you end up running 2 sort of groups, I guess, Alias and the luxury family hotel sort of side by side. What was your secret? What were you doing that enabled this sort of reasonably rapid expansion? Was there a need for change within the hotel market, and did it go back to sort of that change that you'd seen with Robin at the Chewton Glen? I kind of wonder, was it sort of just right timing, and then what was the strategy to enable that growth?
So luxury family hotels was what I wanted to do. As I said, that resonated with me at the time with a 6-month-old child, and the development of luxury family hotels was always sort of dearest to my heart. We and that was taking the concept that Nigel had kind of proved at Woolley and rolling it out. So the Old Bell was a sort of a stepping stone. We disposed of the Old Bell to get going with Alias. So Woolley Grange, Moonfleet Manor, Foy Hall and Ickworth were the 4 luxury family hotels that we developed, and they're still doing today what we started doing with them all those years ago. When we sold those to Von Essen added in a few others that I don't think really worked as luxury family hotels, and I'm not quite sure whether that brand is still intending to be developed along the lines that we started. But equally, we felt that brand was a niche and had a very we couldn't, or rather, not about what we could and couldn't do. There wasn't the place in the marketplace for 100 luxury family hotels. We'd done 4, and there might have been the opportunity for a couple more, but it wasn't it was a quite an expensive product. If you think about it, because you were providing, free, in inverted commas, creches with the hotels, it made no sense to stay there if you didn't have a family and had a reasonable amount of disposable income, because it was an expensive, they were, expensive hotels to stay in. Because the creches were basically, costs of the creche were covered by what people paid for the rooms. So and that's how the model worked. And so it was very much a niche model, I still think that's proven today. I mean, there's a few others that kind of followed in our footsteps. I think Richard Ball at Colcott would probably argue that he stole the idea from Nigel in the first place. In fact, he's already told me that that's what he did, and they copied it, and there's been a few others done it since. But again, there aren't hundreds and hundreds of hotels, country house hotels out there that have got that proposition where you bring your family and the kids get looked after in the den. And in fact, I think that proposition needs to evolve now anyway, because that idea of well-off London families having a nanny coming away, sticking the kids in the den whilst the adults have a good time, and then maybe having a little bit of swim time with the kids is I think families have moved on from that as well. So I think that. That if I was running luxury family hotels today, I would be looking very hard as to excuse me, how to take that business on. But as I say, I still think it is very much a niche market. And so having done a few of the luxury family hotels and felt actually we're quite enjoying, and I still had this appetite of investors that kept filling in these cards and telling me they wanted to give me money. So there was a sort of by this stage, a fairly strong source of capital in some shape or form, which we needed to match with a product that we felt we could do as in tandem with the luxury family hotels product. So that's where Alias came. Robin had already done Hotel du Van. In fact, he started Winchester the very same day that we started the Old Bell. Robin's and my careers have sort of interwoven quite a bit over the years, so we'd looked at what Hotel du Van were doing. Obviously, Malmaison had already been around since the mid-90s, and we thought, there's lots. This is a big market. This opportunity, sort of town and city centre. Funky hotels aiming at the sort of business traveller, mid-market sort of leisure guests. There's a massive opportunity, and that's what Alias tried to be. We developed 4 Alias hotels over about 5 years, and would like to have done more. We actually bought a building in Liverpool that was what brought our Alias plans to a grinding halt, because we bought that building on the expectation we would get a grant to develop it. It was a lovely old warehouse in the centre of Liverpool, and the Northwest Development Agency, who were the grant awarding bodies, assured us that we could get, I think it was 2 million. It was a lot of money to develop this hotel. And then just as apparently they were about to sign our grant contract award, Liverpool was granted the European City of Culture for 2008, and they suddenly thought, we need to spend all of our money developing public realms, sorting out the streets and everything else to make Liverpool look pretty. So we lost our grant, which meant we had a building that we couldn't do anything with, and that was basically the end of Alias. We had to sell it off the back of that.
Okay, interesting. Just as a matter of interest, I'll come back to that in a second. But that luxury family hotels, what's the sort of sweet point rooms wise? Were they all of a similar level? How many rooms did you need to sort of to pay for the creche and the rest of the facilities?
30 to 50.
Right. Okay. Asking for a friend, as a person with a 12-bed hotel, which is always a little bit of a struggle to get to work, I'm always interested into what's the perfect kind of room size? How many have you got at Congham now?
So we've got 26 at Congham, and I don't think that's quite enough. We've got plans to grow that to between 30 and 40. I think as a single unit leisure hotel in the provinces, provided you're in a reasonably good sort of leisure destination, much less than 30 is hard work. Yeah. It's okay, but much more than 50, and you turn it into a completely different product. It loses the individual, quaint, personal touch and feel.
Yeah.
Becomes more.
Okay, well, always learning. I think Robin backs that up. He was sort of 30 to 35, I think. So yeah, it's taken me a while to learn that I need to double the size of my hotel, which is tricky. Anyway, it's on the market, but that's a whole nother story. So I read that originally the motivation was to sell Alias, keep luxury family hotel, but then you end up selling both fairly quickly. What was the reason? Did Von Essen just come along and offer you too good a deal, or had you actually considered selling the family hotel group before that?
The answer to that question is the former. Yes, Von Essen came along and offered us too good a deal. I'm very glad they did with hindsight, because what we were actually doing before they came along was embarking on a management buyout, where we were going to, we're going to buy out our investors who by now had been on board, some of them since 1993, since the old Bell days. We tried to sort of make a market for the shares by going on to some of these bourses. I think it was called OFX or something, I can't remember now, to try and create a little bit of a market, but they don't really work. We were too small to go on to AIM or anything like that. So we needed to find an exit, and we decided that the way we were going to do that was sell Alias and carry out a management buyout of the shareholders in luxury family hotels, effectively by doing a highly leveraged sale and leaseback. This was 2005, 2006. At that point, we thought that the world was going to carry on this upward trajectory that was accelerating forevermore. No one foresaw the 2007 crash, and I guarantee if we had succeeded in going ahead with that highly leveraged management buyout, I would not be in the hotel business, certainly as my own hotelier, as my doing my own business to this day, because I think I'd have lost everything.
Wow.
So it was again a fortunate timing. However, and as I'm sure most you will know, and most people know, they've heard the history of Von Essen, which was a crazy sort of time where this chap, Andrew Davis, was basically hoovering up every single quality country house hotel that he could. He was getting ever more hungry to buy more and more hotels. And he basically just knocked on our door. He'd heard that we were doing the management buyout, so he'd heard that these, as he saw them, properties were for sale, and it was Ickworth that he particularly liked. He'd already got Cliveden. He liked the sort of the association with the grand old National Trust, and in the case of Ickworth, the Harvey family and everything else, and he just wouldn't go away. The difficulty with him was that he's a very difficult man to deal with, and also he'd never tried to buy a group before. He'd only ever bought privately owned hotels, where he'd essentially gone along to Mr. and Mrs. Smith and said, I want to buy your hotel. And Mr. and Mrs. Smith said, well, it's not for sale. And he'd said, well, it's worth 100. I'll give you 120. And they'll say, oh, okay, well, if you're going to give us 120, that means we don't have to work for the next 5-10 years to get it to worth 120. Fine. And then he'd say, but the trick is I'm only going to give you 100 today. You've got to leave 20 in, and I'll give you 20 back in a few years' time. And that's how he built up Von Essen. That was the model that he used, was persuading people to leave money on the table, because he basically got the bank debt and used the vendors to supply his equity. But of course, he couldn't do that with a group, because I had lots of individual shareholders who weren't interested in selling their shares but being paid in 5 years' time. It was like, you want to buy my shares, give me the money. So we had to find a way of selling which allowed them to exit and also allowed him to fund it in the way that he was funding his business. So Muggins here was the one who left his money on the table, which I don't regret doing now, but if I'd known what Mr. Davis was like, I probably wouldn't have done it at the time. But I'm pleased to say I did get my money out before Von Essen went bust.
You were lucky on the timings there. I know you said at the time that it was one of the most stressful periods you'd had, sort of the time of that deal. What was it particularly? Was it literally just the sort of legalities of it, or running the businesses whilst knowing you were selling it? What was causing such a change? I think I read that you actually questioned your sort of life in hospitality at that particular period.
Yeah, the stress was because having done all my businesses, I mean, by this stage, I think I had 480 shareholders. They're all private individuals, and I took personal responsibility. I felt a personal sense of responsibility for looking after their investment. Many of them I still, talk to this day, but at this particular juncture, there were, out of 480, you're always going to have one or two who are starting to question what's going on and what are the motives. And a couple of them suspected that because we'd made it known that we were doing the management buyout, that we were obstructing the Von Essen deal in order to keep the business for ourselves. Nothing could be further from the truth. I was desperate for Von Essen to just either cough up and buy the thing or bugger off. But that wasn't in my gift to make that happen. That was in Mr. Davis's gift, and he was struggling to, as I say, to do this transaction because he didn't have pots of money at his disposal. He was, wanting to do a creative deal. And so it ran on for too long. So it was probably about 18 months between when they first approached us and when we finally sold. Ickworth was the last one because the hotels were in two separate companies. We had three in one company and one in another. And all during that period of time, I felt that, my shareholders who'd been with me for a long time were increasingly thinking I was trying to screw them. And I didn't like that feeling.
Mm. Yeah, nasty. You can't work in hospitality, I don't think, and just be a completely ruthless, sod, can you? I think, you like people, particularly if you've done the initial deal. So, well, congratulations on selling out and getting your money. I know there was a bit of a time period, like you say, to get it, but well done for doing it. Instead of running for the hills, randomly you ended up in Portugal. Why?
Okay, so there is a reason to most of my madness. I come back to luxury family hotels, and I mean, I loved every single day of building up that business and developing it. In partnership with Nigel, starting from the idea that he created at Woolly and developing that through to as far as we took it in the UK. And having decided that this market was limited in the UK, we simultaneously thought, but there's a fantastic opportunity for what I would loosely describe as luxury family holidays. So luxury family hotels, those hotels were short break businesses. People would come to them for 2 or 3 days, mainly over a weekend. But people with preschool age children, they'd come midweek because it would be a slightly better deal Monday to Thursday than Friday to Sunday. But those same people were going to their villa in Marbella for 2 weeks, or 3 or 4 times a year, and we thought we can take this model abroad and take it to the next stage and develop a resort that appeals squarely to this same audience. And that's really where Martignal came into being. The site, it's the most wonderful site. It's the most amazing piece of Europe. You are right at the end of the Western Algarve. Literally, there's a next stop is America. It's the most southwesterly point of Europe, and this site was right on a beach. It had got planning consent, historic planning consent. It was in a national park where you'd never get consent today, but it got an age-old historic planning consent for a whole load of villas and a little hotel. And and we thought we can turn this into something amazing. And we brought Conran on board to master plan it, to try and come up with a scheme that developed took the existing planning and basically amalgamated a whole load of villa plots into one big plot, which together with the hotel allowed us to develop what became a 132 house, 2 and 3 bedroom contemporary resorts with 4 restaurants, bars, shops, creche, obviously, beach club, swimming pools. That is what is the resort Martignal today. Our former partners in that have now developed that to have 3 or 4 Martignals dotted around Portugal, but the one that we did in Sagres was the first, and kind of, for me, that was because Nigel had started Luxury Family and I got on board with him on day 2. I found the development of Martignal so rewarding because I was there on day 1. Nigel and I took our combined expertise, both in terms of product and in terms of how we were going to finance it and how we were going to develop it, from a bare piece of land up to a finished product. I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, I bet that was really exciting. How long did it take from concept to opening to the public?
So 2004 was when we first went there. 2005, I think, when we first started working with Conran, and it opens its doors in 2010.
Oh wow!
April 2010.
Yeah, and well received.
Amazing. I mean, it's still winning accolades to this day as Europe's best family-friendly resort and such like.
Yeah, I had a look on the website yesterday actually and thought, yeah, it looks lovely. I must go over. Are you still involved? Or?
No, it says we did it. It was a Swiss couple that owned the land, so they weren't willing to sell to us. In fact, they wanted us just to run the hotel. We said, we're not running a hotel for you, but if you want to do it in partnership with us, we'll develop this amazing resort. So we partnered with them to develop it and open it, and they're now running it.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, exciting time. Did you move over there for that period, or?
No, I moved to Bishop Stortford at about that time because I spent an awful lot of time on EasyJet from Stansted to Faro. I became a very regular customer of EasyJet. I did it twice, where I went from home and to back home in a day to go to a meeting. I could just do it a day. I caught the 6 o'clock flight out from Stansted, and I could get to Martignal and have a 3-hour meeting and still catch the last flight home. But that was a bit. Most months I would go out for about a week or 10 days each month.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think given the opportunity, particularly once you had some rooms to stay in over there, I think staying overnight must have been a better option. So, sort of continuing this adventure, which I love. It really is a proper hospitality adventure and a bit of serendipity and these sort of zigzags, I suppose. Von Essen ends up going into administration. It doesn't sound to me like that was completely surprising by sort of how well leveraged they were. Were you surprised? I guess the backdrop was the sort of global financial crash, but had you anticipated that?
Yes, it was always going to happen because basically it was a plane that couldn't land. So long as property prices continued to rise, the plane could keep flying, and the model of sort of overpaying for assets on the basis that asset's going to continue to grow in value and then continue to gear up to continue to pay back what you've already bought was workable. But once the crash happened, that plane was always going to crash very quickly, and it did.
Yeah. And did you sort of, if you appreciated that in the early days, had you ever considered that you might end up buying back some of those hotels?
Yes, and this coincided with us just having opened Martignal, so it's sort of I was beginning to think, what am I going to do next? But I also thought, because Von Essen had hoovered up so many amazing trophies, that those with far deeper pockets than little Nicholas Dickinson would, come in and hoover up the estate, and would, blow me out of the water in terms of if someone wanted as you can see from the people who bought them, the Chewton Glen Brigade, the Livingston brothers, or the likes of that. If they wanted to buy something and you were competing with them, they could just move much more quickly than you, and you'd end up losing a bit of money, wasting your time. So I sort of stood on the sidelines for a while and watched what happened after the estate was sort of marketed, and indeed watched with interest my now former business partner Nigel, together with Patron Capital, who he'd partnered with, buy back luxury family hotels, and so I had a bit of a window in what was happening in terms of the buying up the Von Essen estate, and I decided I'd just stay in the wings. And then I think it was about 6 months after they were launched, there was a group of hotels that it was made clear by the administrators had no interest. And one of them was Congham. And I'd known Congham from its very, very early days. I was lucky enough back in the 1980s to be awarded a scholarship from Oxford Poly to research the country house hotel market. And they basically paid me to drive around the whole of the UK, interviewing hoteliers up and down the country in the mid-80s. And Trevor and Christine Forecast, who owned Congham at that time, were one of the hoteliers that I interviewed all those years ago. And
you could have done a podcast if in different times, Nicholas. That would have been an ideal opportunity.
They'd only just started Congham, and I thought they had a nice little quaint hotel. I hadn't been to it for many years since, but I thought it had a bit of potential, and I was curious as to why no one had snapped it up. And so I just popped up to have a look and realised why, and it was because it was the only one in the estate, the Von Essen estate, that they were in the middle of doing a development at the time the administration happened. So they were putting on a spa, and obviously the builders of the spa were a creditor in the administration, so they'd exercised their right under that contract to effectively take possession of that bit of the site, and so Congham was being sold as an unsaleable asset. No one with their right mind would buy something, and try and sort that out. So the administrators eventually realised that that's what they were going to have to do. So they entered into a new, I think it was about £500,000 contract with the builders to sort of get the spa finished off before they sold it. And I thought, well, actually, because that's happening and because it's all too difficult for these big boys and all too messy, maybe that will be an opportunity for me to pick up. So I did.
Amazing. Another bit of serendipity. Did you and Nigel almost, because I know he bought back a number of the hotels, did you and him almost work together again? Because by this point you'd been working together for a long time, and was it a conscious decision that you wanted to go out on your own? Or?
Yeah, it was that as I say, that business partnership was incredibly mutually beneficial, and I enjoyed every minute of it. But it had run its course, and it was time for us to do our own thing, and particularly for me, not necessarily to do something on my own. Everything I've done in my life, I've done in partnership. I'm slightly unusual as an entrepreneur. I think most entrepreneurs are loners, and have a vision or an idea that they want to pursue in almost a messianic like state, and hope that people will buy into sort of following their idea. I've throughout my life enjoyed doing things in partnership with others. So whether that be my successful business partnership with Nigel Chapman, or today my partnership at Congham with my wife, who started out working for me at the Old Bell in 1994 as sales manager, and we've worked together for 25 years, and she's now my business partner at Congham, as well as our finance director, who's an important partner for me in that in my relationship now. But it's also the partnership with the partnership is a fundamental tenet in hospitality. If you're delivering hospitality, that partnership between the staff and the guests is critically important. And a lot of people, I think, get this wrong, where they think that it's just about giving people a good time. And as long as you're giving people a good time, you can get as many people as you can, because that's going to make you busier. But you've got to focus on the fact that what the enjoyment and the experience of having a good time to one person might be different to someone else. And you've got to, first and foremost, be true to what you're all about, what you are, what your proposition is. And I see it sometimes at Congham, where a guest will walk through the front door and I think to myself, shit, you shouldn't be here. You're not right for us. And that's not an arrogant statement. It's not meant to mean that they're weird or something. It's just that what they want is not what we do. And that's probably first and foremost our fault, because we haven't communicated our message clearly enough. They're expecting something that we don't typically provide. And that then, if you get too many of those people, you don't say to them, go home, you shouldn't be here. You obviously take their money and try and give them a good time, but then you hope they won't come back. I liken it to the fact that I want every single person who walks through the front door at Congham to love it or hate it within a few seconds. And I don't care which one of those two things they do. I just don't want them to walk in and think, oh, this is all right. Because that means, they're just looking for a bed for the night. I don't sell beds. I sell experiences. And if you want a bed for the night, stay at a travel lodge. They're very good, or Premier Inn or something. They're a very good commodities product. But if you're in the experiences game, you want people to engage with that experience as passionately as possible, as forcibly as possible. That means they need to love it or hate it. Otherwise, what is it? They don't have a connection with it. And it's by recognizing that partnership between the staff and the guests, because that then allows the staff to deliver your version of hospitality as if it were their own. Because they've got guests who are almost universally coming for what we do, not coming for something that we don't do, but they might want. And bringing all of that together and bringing the partnership concept together, whether that be between me and my investors, or me and my business partners, or me and my staff, or my staff and my guests, or my guests and my business. That's really what I think makes for any successful hospitality business. You can have all of the marketing tricks that can be just a strap line, or they can be genuine. Congham built its reputation on the back of its herb garden. We still live off the back of the fact that we've got a herb garden with 480 variety of herbs. And we're stretching the point now, because the herb garden where it is where I'm developing more rooms, or hoping to develop more rooms. And I'm sort of thinking, I'm not sure how much longer I can push this sort of herb garden notion. It was genuine in the forecast days, but it increasingly became a strap line in recent times. The press quite like it and still talk about it a little bit. And I kind of wish they wouldn't. I kind of wish they'd just focus on where Congham is now, but I can't stop them doing it. You have something, we talked about Robin a lot in this interview. You have something like the Pig, where that's totally genuine with their 15-mile or 20-mile radius and all the stuff they get from their produce. And but then you also get some businesses where they're marketing themselves off the back of something that's slightly more gimmickry. But whether it's genuine or whether it's just a strap line, underneath all of that has got to be this honest, passionate desire to give people a good time, provided they want a good time in the way that you deliver it. And if you try and be all things to all men in desperately trying to attract anyone who wants to come and visit you and pay you their money, that's when you slip up.
So with all of that journey and all of that knowledge, and it looks like you've really kind of gone full circle, and from what I've read, you seem very happy at Congham, sort of back to where it all started. What have you created? I suppose, who's your perfect target market, and what is that experience that you've created with all of that sort of background knowledge that you have?
That's a really good question and a really difficult one to answer. I don't I don't know. I think if I asked 10 people who visited Congham why they like it, they'd probably give you 10 different answers. I think authenticity, being caring, I think genuinely caring for people, genuinely wanting people to get some enjoyment out of what you're offering is probably what comes across more than anything else. I mean, I liken myself a little bit to a drug addict. I'm not hooked on heroin. I'm hooked on giving people a good time. But also, those people have got to want to have a good time, and they've got to want to have a good time in the way I want to give it to them. So, as I said, if someone wants something that I don't want to give, I'll reluctantly give it to them, and Congham will reluctantly deliver that. Not begrudgingly, because they've paid us some money, but we want to make it. But then also make in a subtle way that makes them realise that actually this wasn't for them, and it's been all right, but they're not going to come back. So you increasingly develop a core of people who just become like it sounds a bit hackneyed, but almost like an extension of one big happy family. We've just last week made a decision as to how we're going to deliver our Christmas and New Year programs. Christmas and New Year is probably the time where we have the most amount of fun. It's a fantastic time. We do a 4-night Christmas package. We then do a 3-night package in between Christmas and New Year, and a 3-night New Year package. We get lots of people who come back year after year for those one or other of those 3 packages. I've been doing it ever since the Luxury Family Hotels days, and it really is a most amazing experience. But you tell me what that package should be today in COVID times. What's going to happen on New Year's Eve? Are we going to allowed to dance? Are we going to be allowed
to be in bed by 10?
Well, okay, this is the point. We've got to be at 10. So, but at the time that Boris tells us what we can do on New Year's Eve, it'll probably be the day before New Year's Eve. Well, that is not enough time for me to persuade 26 couples to come and stay at Congham for 3 nights and have great fun. So we've got to decide that today, because we're already provisionally full for all 3 packages, and guests are just constantly asking, are these going ahead? What's happening? And I decided a week ago, because New Year was a difficult one. Christmas, we think we can pretty much do as we normally do, and the 3 nights in between we call a recharger is fairly standard. But New Year is difficult. It's a 3-night package, but it all comes together in what are we going to do on New Year's Eve. And so we wrote to all the guests and said to them, look, we need you to decide now whether you're going to stay or not, because if you're not, we need to find someone else who is. But we understand that, as things stand, we're all going to be in bed at 10 o'clock. So here's the deal. We're going to have the band that comes and normally plays. They're going to be there. They're going to play some little light music during dinner to sort of entertain you. The fireworks we normally do at midnight, we're not cancelling those. We're going to still have them booked. And if the current rules and the 10 p.m. curfew still in place, then we're going to give you all a glass of champagne at 5 to 10. We're going to set the fireworks off at 10 o'clock, and then we're going to go to bed. And we're going to make it work, and we're going to have a great time, and that's going to be our New Year. And are you still up for that? And not one of them was cancelled.
Yeah, I was going to say, and that's why I love hospitality. It's just full of, creative people who, and it's been the frustration, I suppose, we could dip into COVID briefly, but, the frustration of seeing, hospitality being blamed for transmission rates when it's blatantly not true, is it's full of lovely, beautiful, intelligent people who in their core, in their DNA is this sort of desire to look after people and to keep them safe and to show them a good time. The last thing that we want to do is focus on the cash and exploit people's well-being. But we are such a creative sector that there's been so many many pivots and so many spins, and whatever the government has thrown at us so far, so many people have stood up and tried to find a way through it. But it's been quite heartbreaking to understand, I suppose, how many businesses, despite that resilience and despite that intelligence and that ability to be entrepreneurial, aren't going to come through. What's your thoughts on sort of the relationship at the moment, I suppose, between hospitality, COVID, and the government?
I think, as I know a number of your previous interviewees have said, that Kate Nichols is doing the most amazing job. We have the best person acting as our voice, and she clearly has the ear of government. And so I don't think we're doing any more as an industry than we could to have our voice heard. I think we are being used as a bit of a scapegoat. You're talking to someone in me who's a bit of a lockdown denier. I understand why we went into it on the 23rd of March, and I think if the truth be known, it should have lasted a very short period of time, and then they should have focused on shielding the vulnerable and basically getting the rest of the country back to work. You don't quarantine the healthy, you quarantine the sick and the vulnerable, and we are being used as a scapegoat as to tokenism that the government needs to show what it's doing to continue to fight the virus, and I'm afraid that's going to continue for a while. I feel incredibly lucky at Congham that we're in a part of the country that's got very low infections, so we're in tier 1. I'm so glad I'm not in Manchester or even London. I'm so glad that we're not a wedding venue or trying to run a nightclub business, or so many different sectors of the hospitality industry are just dying at the moment. There's no tourism, there's no groups, there's no weddings, there's going to be a boom of weddings in 2021 and 2022 as we get sort of 2 or 3 years worth of weddings all happening in one. And so those that are in that market who survive that long will have a bumpy year. But meanwhile, they're all bleeding terribly. I feel incredibly blessed. We reopened on the 20th of July, and I haven't had an empty bedroom since we reopened. But that's more to do with the fact that the opportunities of places for people to go and visit and have a break are fewer and fewer far between when you take into fact, if you go to France, you've got to come back and quarantine for 2 weeks. So you've got to have a 3-week holiday to just take 1 week off. And swathes of the country are now increasingly no-go areas from a COVID perspective. So I don't take any pleasure in the fact that we are literally run ragged and packed to the gunnels. I'm grateful for it and feel hugely for those businesses that are massively struggling and are likely to struggle for some time to come. I don't think the vaccine, the hope of a vaccine and people who are holding out for a vaccine, they're going to hold themselves up until we get a vaccine, is likely to make much of a difference. I mean, there's loads of these coronaviruses out there for which there is no potential vaccine. We've just got to learn to live with this virus. And I subscribe to the bit of the scientific community that says that we've already moved from, rather than having about 93% of the population susceptible to this virus, to probably less than 30% susceptible. And on that basis, we've already probably built up a degree of herd immunity that will allow most of us to lead normal lives. But unfortunately, politicians can't admit when they've got something wrong, and the scientists that are advising government are doubling down at the moment on their position that that's not science, that's just crank theories. The Great Barrington Declaration, which is being talked about but now not able to be found on Google because it's been shadow banned, has got an awful lot of eminent scientists that subscribe to it. But we've got a polarized school of thought now between those that think those thoughts and those that subscribe to the sage view that this is still a very dangerous virus that only 7% of the countries had. And if we let it go rip, then we're going to have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of deaths.
It's interesting, and no matter what you think on the virus itself and vaccines and all that kind of stuff, how ridiculous does it feel in your hotel where presumably your guests are only going upstairs to have a sleep and then they're coming back downstairs for breakfast? It must seem completely insane to have to stop serving them at 10 o'clock in the evening.
It's madness, and it puts so much pressure on us because. As I said, we've had to curtail the number of non-residents we do, but our 52 odd residents, 26 rooms every night, they don't want to eat dinner at 5 o'clock. So, we can persuade one or two of them to have dinner about 6 or 6:15 if we're lucky. We generally have to get through an entire service that starts around about 7 o'clock. And if we haven't taken last orders by 7:30 at the latest, we're telling them, sorry, you're going to have your dessert in your room. So we're cramming what would normally be a leisurely service, well, leisurely, but would normally be a service that would sort of start to get going, shortly before 7 and run on till shortly after 9, into doing this, trying to get the same amount of people through between 7 and 8 or shortly afterwards. It puts massive pressure on the staff. I'm hoping that the guests don't feel it, but it's just another unnecessary pressure. And then, of course, you say to the few people who we have let in from it outside that they've got to go home now at 10 o'clock, not a moment afterwards, because we're worried that the police might be knocking on our door and fining us £10,000 or something. And the residents, but it's okay as long as you've ordered another whiskey or another bottle of wine at 5 to 10, you can go and sit in the sitting room and enjoy that wine for as long as you like. It's a nonsense.
It is, I think that's the word, isn't it? Unnecessary and a nonsense. It just feels like, and I think this is the problem with the sort of people, becoming bored, I suppose, and less compliant, is that it's fine when it makes sense, and we absolutely understood the initial lockdown, but when they do stuff like that, you're just like, it just feels completely nonsensical and ridiculous. And we could spend another hour of that, but I'm very conscious of time, not just yours and ours and mine, but for people listening. So can I just talk about, I suppose, your future plans? It feels like the trajectory you've been on before always, I guess, has been about growth and developing a group. It looks like you've got a lot that you can do at Congham. You were planning permission a couple of years ago to add another number of new rooms. You talked then about adding some space sort of where the herb garden used to be. Do you think you've got enough to do at Congham to keep you sort of focused and entertained, or do you think there's an inevitability that you will grow again as you have done sort of historically?
No, the former. I've gone back to my roots. They call me Basil. I think they mean it in a nice way, but I do behave in a slightly maverick way sometimes, and the analogy with Basil Fawlty isn't always wrong. Although I try not to be rude to anyone, but I love I love going back to being able to be, if you like, at the coalface, dipping in to just giving people a great time at a single hotel. As soon as you've got more than one business, that bit of hospitality, by definition, has to be diluted somewhat because you're spending time on, more mundane activities, or, running around trying to sort things out, trying to juggle a bigger animal. So Congham is definitely my last hotel. I don't have any aspirations to do more. I've had lots of people who've brought all sorts of exciting distressed assets to my attention over the last few months, and I've looked at them with interest and thought, I don't have the appetite to make these work. I do have still have the appetite to grow Congham a bit more. We'll come back to the beginning. I think at 26 rooms, it's okay, but could be, it's okay. It's doing all right. It's doing well at the moment, but without blowing my own trumpet, I'd like to think that's because I'm quite good at what I do. I'd like to get it so that someone else, so it's kind of sustainable for the long term, that it doesn't go bust again, like it did when it was Von Essen. And I think it does need to be a little bit bigger to do that. The difficulty with developing an existing business that's already trading well is that it's not only the cost of the development, but the impact on the trade when you do the development. So actually, we jumped in at the start of lockdown to do the refurbishment that we'd planned of the existing spa building, which was always going to be the most disruptive works, whilst we were shut. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. If the government forces you to shut, that's the prime time to do works that would normally disrupt your trade massively. You haven't got any trade, so let's do the disruptive works. So that's quite exciting, and trying to find a builder who could do that, who was able to get supplies. We found someone who was doing work on a hospital site, so they were still getting access to I heard all sorts of stories, like bags of multi-finish plaster that normally cost £8 a bag were being sold for £80 a bag, because no one could get them, and things like that. So that was the worry. But we managed to find someone who could get the materials, and we did that bit of work to the spa, which I'm pleased we did. And yeah, I'm just kind of waiting for what's the right time to sort of start on a few more of these rooms, but hoping that we'll be able to do that either over this winter or early part of next year. And that will, I feel, get Congham to be in a sustainable state for the long term, whoever might be running it, unless they're a complete idiot.
Amazing. Well, look, I think it's brilliant. I love the, just the crazy adventure. You are a, definite human of hospitality with multi decades. But I just love the fact that you've done so many different things and achieved so much and seen so much. And it kind of feels fitting now that you've got, one venue where you can focus on every day and just, create something exceptional. So congratulations on your journey, and I will definitely come to Congham next time I'm in the area. Where should people go, Nicholas, if they want to follow your adventures further?
So I'm afraid I'm a bit of a social media dinosaur. I don't really do it, but Congham is on all the various platforms. It's on Facebook at Congham Hall Hotel and Spa, and Twitter and Instagram at Congham_Hall. And you'd be very welcome, Mark, anytime at Congham. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Okay, well, I'll pop some links up on our website as well, humansofhospitality.co.uk. But for now, has it stopped raining yet?
It has. Yeah, it's brightening up.
There you go. Perfect.
It'll be a good.
All right. Yeah, it'll be good. I'm going to go and walk the dog. Thank you for spending the time, Nicholas. I really appreciate it, and best of luck for the future.
It's been a pleasure, Mark. Thank you.
Wow, if you got to this point in the podcast, you have done very well indeed. That was quite the conversation following Nicholas's extensive journey and career pivots. I hope you got something useful from it and very much enjoyed the conversation. Now, I've popped the links to Nicholas's business up on the podcast website, humansofhospitality.co.uk. And don't forget, whilst you're there, you can sign up to the weekly newsletter to save you a bit of time looking for links. And you'll get an email each Monday morning explaining who this week's guest is, with any useful links directly in your inbox. I don't use the mailing list for anything else, it's just you and me once a week. And also, if you can support the podcast financially, that would be very helpful. It takes a good chunk of time producing a new episode every single week, plus kit and hosting fees and travel and all the work I should actually be doing in my day job. So if you can become a monthly supporter via Patreon or make a one-off donation via PayPal, all the links are on the website and you'll make me very happy. Next week, by the way, we are off to Mexico to chat to Rocco. He turned out to be a super energetic and incredibly passionate hospitality human who has had a global career and now runs a health resort in the Mexican jungle. He really made me smile, and I think he will you too. So please join in, and best of luck this week. Cheers.